Greetings, everyone. Welcome to our exclusive Global Leading Voices webinar campaign. We are delighted to have you join us here today. Please be informed that if you have any questions during the presentation, you may type them into the question box in your control panel. The presenter will answer your questions at the end of the presentation accordingly. Now, without further ado, we will turn the time over to our presenter, who will begin shortly.
Hello and welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Yetmir Yashari, and I will be your moderator for today's webinar, The Role of ISO IEC 27034 in Achieving DORA Compliance. We're excited to discuss this topic and be joined by our esteemed speaker today, Mr. Bevan Lane. And before I get started, I would like to inform the audience that this session is being recorded and will be posted on our website and YouTube channel, along with the slides of the presentation. Furthermore, we encourage you to participate by submitting your questions at any time using the Q&A feature in the chat box. Now, without further ado, let's get started. I'm going to hand it over to Bevan.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the webinar on this pretty interesting topic. A lot of people, even before as we started advertising and started saying, but 27,034, really? How does that link to DORA? And I did get a couple of people actually quite aggressively start to say, no, that's not right. What are you doing? Some other people were a lot more interested in actually trying to go, okay, let's think about how it does. I'm going to show you that it's not such a direct link as many other standards would give you. A lot of other standards are more obvious, and you probably would use them as primary standards. But what's really interesting about this one is that 27,034, I think, is often a standard which a lot of people don't use or use only, in a small way. And actually, when I went through it, I spent a lot of time going into a bit more of the details and the nuances of it. I think it's something that you could get a lot of value out of. We know a lot of people using things like OWASP and using other standards when it comes to secure development. But 27,034 is actually not just one standard. That's how interesting it is. It's a lot of different standards. It's a whole family by itself, basically, that we could maybe get a lot of value out of. So, all right, let's get into the contents of the topic. The way these, as you may remember, work, it's a 45-minute presentation, then 15 minutes afterwards of questions and things, but I will look out to see if there's any questions that maybe we can jump into before then. I've been a PCB trainer for, we're going to try and work it out now, but I think it's more than 10 years already now. And we've done a lot of courses, and every single one of them has got a link to resiliency and to application security. And that's what makes it so interesting, that there's always a link, and that's what we'll get to later. I do have a few more certifications than that from the PCB. I just put up the ones that are relevant for this discussion. We're not going to talk too much about AR. I think you saw last year, if you were, we did do a talk already on AR. So let's not just leave that topic for today, but even then, obviously with secure applications, there is a link to AR as well. Okay. I found that really cool picture online, trying to sort of talk about DORA and about Europe and, resiliency, security, making Europe stronger and more resilient to attacks. And there's a lot of political stuff that we could talk about that we're not going to talk about today, but you do see some very obvious things which Europe and Great Britain, which you can see in that picture, is separated from. I'm sitting right now in the UK. There's a very clear link to resiliency being a key aspect right now. 2 days ago, the UK took a lot of its money that it was giving out to foreign aid and replaced and channeled that money into the military. When the new Labour Department of Defence guy joined end of last year, there was already a discussion saying, we are going to be investing a lot more into our military, into our defense, into our resiliency. And this week, we've seen that happening. The sums are massive in terms of increases. And a lot of this is now because of this fear of resiliency. A lot of new regulations, a lot of new initiatives coming through right now, talking about the importance of this specific topic. So I don't think it can be any more relevant. The fact that DORA's, the deadline is over and done. But the fact is that this thing is much bigger than DORA, and I think that's part of the discussion today. Okay, so yeah, there's no introduction, it's just me. We've done that quick introduction. I often do this as a panel, but I thought today, take this one by myself and then see what we can come up with. We'll talk about DORA, and then we're going to talk about any critical standards that are generally used. So for all of you who are involved in DORA, the more obvious resiliency attached standards, obviously ISO 27001, how does it map? And then we'll spend quite a bit of time talking about 27034. What is it? How can you use it? There's some critical specific concepts, terminologies, which I know some people have been using, and I've actually seen a lot of these concepts being used even without 27034 before in terms of application security. So that's pretty interesting. And then at the end, we'll wrap it up with a few things, and then we can get some questions and answers going. And I'm not straight off the bat tell you that I'm an expert on 27034. I've spent some time looking at it. This topic was given to me as almost a bit of a challenge. I'm just going to learn a bit about 27034 and see how we can adapt it to DORA, which I found quite fun actually to do. All right, so without further ado, let's talk about DORA. It's not DORI, it's not the DORA the Explorer. There's a lot of jokes, a lot of people have, it's a very serious topic, but this does lighten something and say, well, a lot of people, when you say DORA, are going to think of those two things. So the name itself is quite interesting when you're trying to do something serious with the people that maybe are not in the know. Other people have taken this topic and don't even know what those two pictures are about. They think of DORA as a specific resilience thing. The objective of DORA and that date are two things to start off with. Okay, the date of 17th of January 2025, it's been around when you look at the history of DORA since 2020, 21, 22, been derived, been put out there. So it's not like, this thing was only given a couple of months. It's been around and evolved to this point that it's already there. I assume, the way these things are evolving, there will be updates to regulations in the next couple of years, but it is pretty much settled now. The idea is the security of financial entities. It's maybe not only the IT security, it's another word that we look at, but the ultimate goal is making sure the financial sector in Europe is able to stay resilient in the event of severe operational disruptions. There's other regulations like NIS2 that you might have seen, which are a little bit wider than financial entities. There's other regulations being drafted that are in other, specific areas where things like ISO, PCI, SOC 2, all those things are looking at resiliency, business continuity. It really is an important focus for us right now. Okay, but DORA, like I said, it's been around a while. That date, I suppose when we're looking at that date, we know that not everybody has taken DORA and implemented. The other aspects of DORA is that it reaches into financial entities and their suppliers and their partners. So that's the wider part we're going to talk about now. And we've been exposed to this by companies as far wide as in Asia, phoning us and saying, do we need to actually apply DORA because now we've got these financial services clients in Europe? What does that mean for us? And often that's a discussion about whether it's relevant or not. And in some cases, it's quite interesting because the link is very small, but actually the relevance is still quite high. So this link between Europe and the rest of the world has always been a thing with, GDPR, with things like DORA. So it is far wider than what that comment says sometimes, but in other cases, maybe the link is so small that it isn't really relevant. And that's where the discussions come in. You ask questions on people. Okay, so the 5 pillars. So you can see, got the 5 pillars. Some of you have seen this many times. Others you maybe don't know much about DORA, so I did put them in. And the first one is very much related to risk management, but in the ICT components. And as I mentioned to you, the other standards such as 27001, which we'll show now, have actually added a lot more now in terms of ICT continuity, ICT risk management. So you're looking at establishing something which is really focused on, international reactive process to a proactive process. So you want risk management to be a lot more real time, a lot done more seeing risks before they occur, things like threat hunting, threat modeling, all those sort of aspects of it is where they want us to focus. So we don't just do a risk assessment once a year, walk out the door and say, risk assessment done. Risk assessments are, risk management now is a continuous process. And last year I went to a conference in Manchester where a lot of people were saying the old version of risk management is gone because we need to do it a lot more proactively, we need to do it a lot more sustainably, and we need to understand it, and we need to always be on top of it. And a lot of companies are sort of in a hybrid. They're not necessarily doing it as proactively as what those people are talking about, but that evolution is very, very interesting. Okay, the second aspect, incident reporting, again, widely shared across all regulations. If you look at across GDPR, you look at every single standard, incident reporting, risk management are two incredibly important aspects of it. DORA has some very steep fines potentially in it, and those steep fines are connected to, you know, how quickly you put things in place and how you respond. So incident reporting, as I said, in every single regulation I can think of, literally in terms of IT, directive aims to, you know, harmonize how you do it. And the trick is there, how do we do reporting across Europe? All those financial services companies talking about how they're harmonized, that they're doing it. What I have seen in the past is that the financial services industry, specifically in Europe and some of the countries in Africa, have been doing this for quite a long time. They actually have been meeting and harmonizing their reporting. There's a lot of the big banks and insurance companies across these countries who actually have, for years already, have a harmonized way of reporting, where they've got a system set up where you can actually go and send incidents, and then a company in Poland can see what a company in Slovenia is doing, a company in the UK or in South Africa. It's been really good how they've actually done a lot of this already proactively. So a lot of these regulations are aimed at the companies that maybe aren't at that tier, that are not doing this, because the bigger ones have been doing this for a long time. But what the regulation allows them to do is to then harmonize it for everybody, and then allow the big companies to actually go, okay, what is different? What do we still need to do? And how can we maybe help those smaller companies? And I have seen, specifically in financial services, they're very good at this. A lot of companies are doing this already, and actually helping people quite a lot. All right, so then we need to do testing. And the testing aspect of this is the one that I've heard a lot of scaremongering, people, you know, putting their arms up and saying, oh, we are all terrible at this, we need to do it a lot more. So a lot of the challenges are in that, where people only have done this at a very high level, not really taken it as seriously as maybe what they should be doing it. Those are the companies that are most be affected by this. The problem with this is, you know, when you start testing constantly, it's very onerous. It takes a lot of time. There is a lot of people that are thinking that DORA, in some cases, has taken this and put too onerous on companies. Other companies are saying, well, that's what we've been doing for years. We just need to adapt it again. Okay, so, but the trick here is that it's connected into a risk-based approach. So you're doing a risk-based approach in terms of your resilience testing. It's a big one. Resilience testing is really for you to understand how you can make it as effective as possible. How do we learn from it? How do we improve it? Because you don't want that you haven't done any testing, and then when a real incident happens, you actually are taken down to your knees because you didn't understand actually the benefits of what testing could have done for you. And there's lots of horror stories of people who don't do testing and then realize they don't even have the documents ready. They don't even have the right people available, and it leads to major issues in terms of the actual incident and how they do respond to it. Number 4 is one you hear all the time. Third-party risk management, supplier management. Again, every standard has really focused far more on this over the last 5-10 years. What are you outsourcing? You know, what do we need to do in terms of your third parties? And I'll show you now the links between this. And I want you to immediately also think about all 5 of these when we're talking do have a link to application security. Of course they do. That's why we had today. I'll come back to that and show you how that link to application security works. But for third parties, that's an obvious one. Have you got third-party developers involved? or has your application run completely by a third party and you actually are just a person using that application. So that's where some clear links come from this. A lot of breaches, a lot of issues, a lot of problems, especially with resiliency, come from third parties. If you've chosen the third party and they're not actually doing it at the same level as you. So third party risk management, we know, is critical. And then this information sharing, I touched on it already when I spoke about incident reporting. How do we share information? And that's what I mentioned. The ISAC have been doing this for quite a long time, where you actually get an interface where you can share data about an incident. And then you share it, and then all the other financial services companies, if they do have an incident or they do have something, can actually go back and look, oh, this was shared by a company already in France. They've been doing this for a while. We can actually use that. And then by doing information sharing, you can be so much more proactive because you're working together, you're coming up with answers, and you can actually almost stop an incident from happening, because now 20 other people then take that information sharing and put it into their protection, update the EDRs, update their processes, do the patching they need to do to actually stop it happening. Information sharing is critical, and it's something that all of us in cyber should actually be trying to do as much as possible. If you're sitting by yourself, we do this thing about the herd mentality, and then if somebody is not in the herd, they really are at risk, because if you're all in the herd, then the weakest one in the herd is going to be targeted, but you could actually work together. Think of it as, that sort of animal thing. Think about how a family protects their babies, or a big herd protects the smallest and the most prone ones. If you're not in the herd and you're sitting there by yourself, you've got no one to protect you, and information sharing is a massive part of that. Okay, so yeah, I think these 5 pillars are great. I do think a lot of value in DORA. Let's go talk about the mapping to 27001. So the mapping of 27001, there's quite a few sites out there where they talk to you about it. You'll see to 27001, to the latest controls, they do map across both clauses and to the Annex A controls. When we're looking at the first risk management one, it's the obvious risk management clauses in the standard, but there's a couple of other ones there in terms of PI, the privacy controls, how you would do the risk management to that, because when we look at 27701, we look at all GDPR, there's a very close link to privacy. There's also, I've chosen the word there, it's independent reviews 535, and then compliance with policies 536, security awareness, all of those click into it. Okay, so why I wanted to show you this is you'll see there isn't a clear one here in most of these to application security, and I think only 1 or 2 that you can actually track down, but there are clear links to other aspects that we've been speaking about already, such as supply management, incident management, risk management, which comes into this now. But when I did this table and looked in 1 or 2 other areas, I couldn't see, there wasn't like a clear one saying application security needs to be done here. And I think that's where a lot of the discussion comes from, where people have online said to me already, but why? Because this is much more about resilience, business continuity, risk management, incident response, because application security connects into all of that. And that's what I'll show you just now. Okay, so when you go, you'll see that the risk management article there talks about obviously security policies. These ones here, identify, protect, those articles 7 to 10, very strong on supply and incident management, and the technical controls, configuration, vulnerability, network management. All of those, obviously a very strong connection, because if you've got an app, it's all connected into all of that. But you can already see now, even though it doesn't have necessarily the application security ones, it's got configuration, vulnerability, and network management as specific controls there, which have all got links into application security. Then the business continuity articles 11 and 12, they very clearly are talking about risk management, business continuity. These Annex A ones here, 14, 15, 16, are about business continuity technologies and how you do it. And the 529, 530s, combination of business continuity and risk management. When we go into 13 and 14, then we saw more about training, communication, technical controls. The technical controls are what you're doing DLP. We're going to talk about some of that stuff just now. Vulnerability in management, very similar to what you saw here in Article 11 and 12. The specific articles related to incident management response, obviously that's a clear link to incident management response controls in ISO 27001. And then the resilience testing is continuous improvement and business continuity. I love this because a lot of people don't go and look at the continual improvement links. They just go straight to business continuity. So when you're doing business continuity tests, how do you actually go and show that that leads to continual improvement? And I touched on that right at the beginning to say to think very strongly about that. Think about, you know, when we're doing testing, how does that show improvement and how do we stop reduce the issues, reduce the risk related to when we do actually have a real incident that we, you know, make major mistakes because we didn't do the testing to actually stop those mistakes. So continued improvement, very clear. I did like the fact that the couple of tables I found online were talking very strongly about that too. And then this one we're going to talk about now, the third-party risk. So the third-party risk, a lot of articles on it when you go into DORA 28, just to show you how important third-party risk is. And supply and incident management are the main issues. Sorry. The supply and incident management is how do you actually look at that? And you'll see those are the clear ones from ISO 27001 in those areas. How to look at incident management, how to look at supply and management. Okay, so I do like that table. Obviously, we'll share this link. I'm sure many of you have seen this before in other ways. But what I did try and do is give them headings to show you actually really what the areas are that these all come back to. They're not just separate controls by themselves. They're all connecting to some sort of area. All right, so normally when we do a thing on DORA, we talk about these main ISO standards after that. So we start with 27001, and then once we've done with 27001, we go to the main thing being resilience. So business continuity, ISO 22301 is a tried and tested, very strong standard talking about business continuity. The new versions of it have moved stronger between that to resilience as part of it. You know, resilience is something that every company now is looking at, or they should be looking at, because of the fact if you're not resilient and you can't handle this, you're not going to be economically successful and you're not going to work together. But a big part of resilience is working with other companies, and that's a supply chain risk management, the second part of it. So there's a lot of companies then that have done supply chain risk management, and a lot of the questions they're asking their suppliers is on business continuity. So, you know, you look like you've got quite good security controls, but what happens when something goes wrong? How strong is your business continuity aspect of it? The 27035 is the standard. There's links to GDPR 27001, but incident management is discussed in 27035. All of these standards have, nearly all of the standards have recently been upgraded, reviewed, and given new versions, 2022, 2023 versions. And that was a key part when I was looking at 27034, because when we look at 27034, those standards have been around a long time, 2011 through to 2018. And I wanted to see, and when you look at they've all been reviewed, or nearly all of them have been reviewed. Some of them have actually been taken out, some of them have been updated. So very important in terms of that. But when you are doing a DORA project, you know, the question really is, do I need to look at 27034? Did I go read all of that, all of those standard 27034? And the answer is you don't have to, because the key aspects are in this standard here. But if you are using components of 27034 in your application security, you are going to do a lot better. And there's a lot of ways of doing that, obviously, without necessarily reading everything in every single standard, which I'll talk about now. So be careful of not overcomplicating it, careful of focusing on the right places, but I'll show you now how 27034 then leads into that. Okay, so 27034, let's get stuck into the standard. Looking where I'm on time-wise, it should be perfectly in terms of giving you enough time to actually focus on 27034. It talks about integrating security into application development. So the words very strongly from 27034 is about how do we integrate security into the processes used for managing the applications. So the word process again is very strong. It's used across everything in 27034 talks about process approaches, how to actually create processes, how to actually integrate things into security into applications. It's a multi-part standard. There were seven different standards. It's always a fun one for me on ISO, because obviously if they put it all together into one standard, it's massive. But now you've got 7 different ones. Necessarily, you might have to buy all 7 because what's the point of only having 1 or 2 of the kit? There are ways, obviously, where they do try and bundle them together so they are cheaper. But yeah. A lot of way we do this is we subscribe to services where you can get into the family of 27,000. So look in the ISO standards list. Instead of buying every standard separately, you subscribe for an annual period to have all the latest versions of 27,000. And we find that it works really well for us, especially here, because now I could go into that and actually track down all the 27,034 standards. So where does it cover? It covers both software applications developed internally or things that you get by external acquisition, outsourcing, offshoring, or through hybrid approaches. So it's very much focused on both. It's, well, not both, on all of that whole scale, because in some cases you might be developing partially in-house and partially externally. So that hybrid approach, 27034 realizes that there's a lot of applications developed by external parties. You might have just bought a solution through external acquisition. You might be merging different applications. All of that are critical aspects here in terms of what 27034 looks at. It looks at all aspects, and you'll talk about protecting information access as well as preventing unauthorized use, actions of application. So it's very comprehensive in terms of what it does, because it's 7 different standards with a lot of detail and connected to it. It doesn't tell you need to do things in a waterfall approach or in an agile approach. It's very agnostic of that. It's saying whatever version, whatever method you use, make sure that you actually try and integrate security across all of that. And obviously there's a lot of other processes which do talk a lot about security, but this one gives you some extra stuff that maybe are not in them that you could be looking at. Yeah, this is the concept that I want you to think about quite seriously, is this: do it properly once and reuse. Now, I went onto 2 or 3 sites to do some research after I checked and I'll give you some links to them. There's one which is a nice practical guide to ISO 27034. And the one comment was, well, the problem is if you don't do it properly once, then all those mistakes come through into every single other approach. So it's very strong that you've got to do it properly at the first time. Properly is also a word which is, what does properly actually mean? So what they're saying is integrate security, check it, test it, make it really bulletproof, as strong as possible, and then reuse that. And the best app houses, the dev houses, people that are doing this, they generally do that. They make a bulletproof version that they just then use and edit. But they've got one master copy that they reuse, and you obviously you're going to go back and have to redevelop it later. But looking at it and using one instead of always starting from the beginning and doing something from scratch, you've got a proper, good, secure version that you can use and then reuse when you're doing this. Strong part of application security. The idealistic part is something we always think about. So when you're reading the standard, you're saying best practice is, a thing, but is best practice always possible? And the ideal, people like us working in security, is we're trying as hard as possible to get to the ideal. We're trying to be idealistic, but we're also practical. We do know that sometimes it isn't going to work. And that's what some of the comments that I thought was quite interesting in terms of 27034. Okay, so there are 7 different standards. The one has been cancelled, doesn't exist anymore. But the first one is, as always with most of these families of standards, is the overview of this definitions, concept, principles. So everything in here is telling you about what the concepts are. And I want to talk to you now about trust. I'm going to talk to you about application security controls. There's a thing called OC. I'll get to those words now. But the concept here, the first concept you're going to look at is defining a targeted level of trust. So what is that? And I'll come back to that now. But it's for the application when you design and build it. And then you say that the trust level is this. Every time we do application build, it must meet that level of trust. And obviously the only way you can check that is to do checking, is to do testing. So coming up with a targeted level and then making sure that all the applications meet that targeted level. We are going to talk about auditing, certification, there's common criteria, there's a lot of schemes. And when you look at NIST, what NIST is doing, a lot of what 27034 was doing was taking controls from those, was saying, what is OS doing, what is NIST doing, bringing this concept together. So this targeted level, this common criteria, very strong from the NIST family of controls. But again, even ISO does refer to them in different ways. Okay, so first one, terms and definitions. It's a good amount of content in there. So it's not just at a very high level. It actually goes into quite a lot of detail about what those definitions are. The second one is the detailed description of something we call an organization normative framework. And we're going to talk to you, I'll take you through what that means now. But it's a lot of guidance for how you would implement this framework. How do I actually put the framework in place? It talks about the structures, the relationship dependencies, and how we bring together different applications. Because in most cases, application doesn't really sit alone. It's looking at different components. It's merging and combined with other applications. Again, very interesting, this stuff in terms of pen testing, understanding application, looking at trust levels. When we're doing testing, how would that all work together? If I understand an application, I can be far better at doing things like pen testing. Talks about this word, implementing, operating, auditing the ONF. So ONF, Organization Normative Framework. I'll take you through a bit more detail now what ONFs are when we get to that slide. Just taking you through all the different ones. So that's 2. And then 3 is the one, this is the broadly applicable and useful part of the standard. This is the one, so if you're only going to want to look at one standard and understand what's happening in 27034, this is the most obvious one. What you'll see in 3 is there will be links to, they'll say words and you'll go, I don't understand what that word means because you didn't look at the classifications and the definitions. But you could online look at those definitions, and they do put them into 3 as well, some of them. So this is where the core, the meat of the actual standard is. And it talks about how do I manage security on each specific application. So all the detail on how you do that is in there. And I'm going to give more detail now on what's actually in 3. The 3 is the good one. 3's got all the detail, but all of them have links. All of them can be useful together if you are going to look into more sort of detail on all of them. 5 is where you get all the protocols and you get structure, schemas. So we're going to talk about this word, application security controls, but this facilitates by giving you all the different formal structures and the components of the framework. So you use 3. You notice there wasn't a 4 because 4 was cancelled. So 4 was taken out and put into other components of the ones. We go from 3 to 5, but 5 and 5.1 are the structures, the details. So when you are looking at 3, you'll get a couple of comments where they'll say, what is an application security control? And you'll go, well, okay, but how do I see the detail? And you're going to 5 to see the detail. Again, a lot of these makes it sometimes a bit complex in terms of doing this, but once you understood, okay, this is how that works, let me look into it. How do I bring that into my methodology? So what you would normally do is read them, go look at your methodology, update your methodologies, and then you wouldn't have to be rereading the standards all the time because you've got them in your methodology. Key tips for how best to do this. All right, so 6 is case studies. Again, that gives you specific examples of what an application security control is, and it shows you those examples. It talks about handling of security in the course of software development. Okay, key part of this, how do I actually do? So I do like that. So now you've read 3, You've got a very good understanding by reading 3. You go to 5, look at the schemas, and now you go, well, how do I bring that together practically? Go look at 6. 6 has case studies on how you would do this. So once you've done that, then we go into 7. And those are the minimum. So this is more about where I'm doing a audit. What is the actual expected level of trust I spoke to you about? And there's always an original application where you perform the activities to get an actual level of trust. So there's a lot of words, actual level of trust and defined level of trust. So what that means in high level is we have this actual level of trust for we come up with something which says all applications need to be this level. Now you actually go and audit them and you find that there is the current level, which is the actual level. So we put a goal in, this is the level. So say we come up with a score of 5, and now we find that all applications are only 3. So the applications are 3, what's the difference between 3 and 5? How do we get there? So a lot of auditing, a lot of assurance testing to work out how do we get from the actual level to our expected level. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about that now. So application security controls and the level of trust. I've got this example on the perimeter trust. I quite like this, and it ties into how you would do this. So baseline relevance, trust that needs can be met, very level, but now we get trust with personal information, trust with sensitive financial information, and then you've got an overall level here at the top. These are taken from a site that I look for, Editing Group, where they've got this. But when we look at it here, what is an IEC? An IEC is simply a control to prevent a security weakness within an application. Okay, so what does that mean? So look at SQL. So this control, binding variables in SQL statements, is an application security control to prevent SQL injection. Okay, so you are going to take an application security control and you're going to then apply it. So when I find problems related to SQL injection, it's because I haven't actually done this control or other controls like this. I might have applied it partially or not applied it at all. So an IEC is just a control. It's just an application security control, but there are a lot of them in there, and we put them into libraries, we put them into different places, but that's how you would put it into. So what I liked about the explanation then, so you use context to derive when they apply. So when do I need to do this? If I don't have SQL, and SQL is not a part of it, obviously that control is not applicable. But now a particular application has specific ISCs that you need to apply. So once you've done that, you need to understand when, so the concepts of trust. So levels of trust, which I was showing you there, each IEC can fit within one or more levels of trust. So the banks are good examples. I like this example here. So level 0 is where you actually have no trust, it's a zero trust, where only IECs that mitigate the highest risk. So you need to put the most highest level of controls into that, into a zero, level 0. If they are if it's level 1, so then you're doing it sort of in that mid-range. So you've got more IECs in level, but you have to put more controls into that part. It's got fewer controls in that level, but it's more than the level 2. Okay, so trying to keep it simple. So there's 0, 1, and 2. So 2 is, it mitigates many more risks, but it's the other end. Okay, so one end level mitigate the highest risks, medium risk, and low risk. That's a simple explanation of that. When you first create an application, it must have a targeted level of trust. So I create an application, I'm looking at this app, and I'll say it needs to meet the levels of trust that are in the middle. So I'm going to go and do all my creation from that level of trust. Everything must have a targeted level. And when you're auditing it, you come up with the actual level of what the trust is. You're trying to always get to that targeted level of trust. So in practice, what this means is not every application needs to have the highest level of security, because when you're looking at the level 2 things, there might be things that are actually here, they're just baseline. They don't need much more because they don't have the highest level, they don't have personal information in them, they don't have banking stuff connected to them, for example. So you can put them into that level. But when you're looking at stuff that have the highest levels, you've got to look at how to actually bring into this pyramid so I can actually trust this application. And that's where this target level of trust. Okay, lower level of trust then can happen for those ones. Go look at the site, securitycompass.com. They've got a detailed ISO 27034 explanations. They give you much more in terms of lots more examples and practices on how you would do this. So if you don't want to read all the standards, I highly recommend this one. Okay, so an organization normative framework is the repository. So when I take each application security control, I put them into this library. So you can store and update the IEC as central library, and you've got a library which is part of the ONF. Okay, so the framework is your overall framework. The library is where you've got a lot of libraries in your framework, and then you've got controls in each one of those libraries. I like this because it now shows you all the elements of what that would be. Okay, so the business context, the regulatory context, and the technological context. So for all of us, is this an online banking application? What would that mean in terms of its business context? Maybe it's only internal facing. So we've got retail clients where they've only got internal facing apps in for a lot of them. And then you take all those internal facing ones and you understand the risk is different because it's only internal facing. I do find in the current environment, there's a lot less which is only internal facing. Most things now seem to have far more of an external facing. But if it's internal or external, does it do money transfers? Does it do banking? All of those are business context. We've been talking a lot. I'm actually writing an article with the PCB now about the business and business strategy. So this first thing is, how does it fit into the business? Very critical aspect to do. Once you understand that, then you look at its regulatory context. Do we need to European privacy? Is it PCI? Is it GRAM? Is it connected in this case to DORA? So that could be a regulatory context. How does the application connect into this? What could be the link? Then technology. So you start off business, you do the regulation, then you look at the technology. So your entire library, your framework has got controls that connect into whether or not. So a good example, with PCI DSS, we now need to look at controls that are applicable to masking card numbers. We might have to look at controls which are connected into stopping information from being leaked. So you're going to take the controls and match them to a combination of these. Context into business, regulatory, and technology. So is it SQL? If, like I said to you, you've got no SQL injection issues to worry about if it's not SQL, but web-based, embedded, how it'll work. So this is where we bring together the links behind this. So the practical ways of doing this, a lot of things are already doing it. A lot of your libraries and things are doing this, but this is the overall approach. And yeah, do you like this guy? He's not ONF, he's very close. He's talking more about lights. Okay, so wrapping up before, I think we're almost on time. Why should you care? I think it's a good question. A lot of people said, why should I come on this thing? Why should I read about this standard? Because I've got so many other standards I need to read about. The nice thing about the standard is they went in and redid all of them, they updated them, they're very, very recent. So 2022, 23, all components are updated where required, they did. But because the way they've written it, they didn't need to update a lot of it because it's written in a concept basis. It's not technology connected in, that you've got to go, you just got to tweak it. So what was different between when I wrote in 2011, there wasn't much cloud. How do I bring in those sort of components? Okay, but they would just add components, but the currency was still there. Great way to understand risk. You can look at internal and external applications and their overall security resilience, and application security, as I said to you earlier, has an impact on every pillar of DORA. Okay, so very important to understand that. So the conclusions and the takeaways from this, I'm just thinking with we've spoken about that, we've spoken about all of them. I'm just making sure I don't miss any slides. So the takeaways, there are much more applicable standards with a direct link. 27001, business continuity, start there. but application security connects into every area. And don't forget that applications are the key aspect. Whenever we have problems, we have actually done all this business continuity, but we've realized why is there a problem here? Or falling put into the work, the collect level of testing on our applications. So application level security for me is one of the critical areas which often falls down because you didn't set it up properly. When you do business continuity testing, it's too late now because you actually didn't set it up properly. So what we're talking about is setting up the pillars of application security first, and then looking at how they link into what we're doing here. Okay, they recently reviewed a lot of good guidance concepts. I think a lot of the stuff in there people are not necessarily aware of. They don't read it and they don't see look at the case study part, for example. You'll see some really good case studies. You can almost cut and paste the case studies and then just put them into application security. You don't necessarily have to read all of it. You can take the parts that are critical for your business. And those concepts, trust, reuse securely, application security controls, they allow you for method to understand risks and tie that into resilience. And as I said, it's long. There may be easy ways to implement application security controls, but that's the negative part of it, where getting somebody that has an understanding, putting it into your thing without everybody doesn't need to read everything in 27034. But having one or two people that understand how best to take everything from 27034 and bring it into your environment. Okay, I like this. This is more of a personal levels of trust. And what we look at when we do this, if all these things which tie quite nicely what we're talking about, because if I've got concern for others, I'm going to share with them. I'm going to share information. If my team is competent and they've got integrity and they've got shared values, you're going to actually lead up to accountability. So it's a far wider one about your culture in your company, but looking at a culture in a company, how I can bring it together at a technical level is a good example here. So go and check out. It's got a cool name, Jessie Lindstone. She's got some good stuff on levels of trust. Okay, I think we're almost perfect in terms of timing. And yeah, I'll look to see if there's any questions. I have already put a bit of a disclaimer in to tell you that I haven't been into all the detail to be able to give you all the answers to this, but I'm hoping that the questions will be more aimed at practically specific things that I can help you with.
Thank you, Bevan, for delivering this highly informative webinar. Sorry, there has been a lot of questions from the audience. We will start with the first one. Is DORA extended or applicable to the African countries, or is it restricted to EU only?
Great question, isn't it? And I did touch on that already to say, in all cases, things don't get extended into Africa through a direct thing, but there's links to other regulations in some cases. And for certain of us, so let's think about you're working in Ghana, but now you start dealing with a financial services company in Europe, and you now are a supplier to the financial services company in Europe. So one of our first queries on DORA was from a company in Southeast Asia. They came to us and said, listen, we're doing so much business, so much application development, so much integration with European companies that they've asked us about how we line up against DORA. Because if we go down and there's a problem with us, it affects the resiliency of our European company. So remember that. Think about if you are going to do business with European customers, European big companies, and if they are in the financial services industry, you may be affected. So that's why DORA is something for literally any country in the world to be thinking about, going, well, am I doing business with European banks, European investment companies, European insurance companies? And we have found that there's quite a few of our clients that are very much not based in Europe that are looking at DORA for that reason.
Thank you, Bevan. Another question is, will DORA be extended beyond financial sector in the near future? And is there any capital worth threshold of what can be considered as critical?
The DORA has a lot of detail in values, and they've broken it up into different levels. So you can go and have a look to see if that applies in terms of levels. I actually don't know much more about whether it's going to be extended beyond financial services, but there are other companies, other industries, and other regulations for different industries. So I think this one is starting with financial because that's where the critical, the backbone of the company in many ways is. But yes, there's going to be other regulations that are connected into that, and I do think there's even looking at DORA, you could apply a lot of those things across all regulations quite easily, without necessarily, just for the benefits, without worrying about having to be actually liable for the actual fines or any of those issues. But when you look at things like GDPR, it's applicable across all industries, and it's got a lot of what DORA is saying already. It's just not so strong and resilient.
Thank you. Another question says, if your company is ISO 27001 compliant, is it absolutely necessary to implement DORA as well? As most of it, if not all of it, all of the principles are already covered in the standard.
We went to a couple of conferences last year and the year before where people were just pointing out the differences, because they were saying that if you are 27001 certified, you've passed a baseline and you think that you're DORA certified, but then you go read DORA and realize that I've got to do maybe more testing now. I've got to do a little bit more proactive stuff, that because 27001, the auditors don't necessarily look at that when they come in. So I'll be very wary of having a fail-safe thing that 27001 means that you're DORA certified. Look at the gaps and look at the fact that the regulations are trying to push it on you in a more vigilant way in some cases. And when I looked at PCI was a really good example. We often use PCI. PCI came out because all these companies were 27001 certified. They saw gaps that PCI said, well, just because you're certified, you actually still have your numbers, you know, in the clear. Yeah, you've done this. So I want to make more granular controls to make sure that you do both. So you're going to have a certain level of assurance from 27001, quite a good level of assurance, but you're going to have gaps. So I would look at that and look at the gap analysis on that.
Thank you. A very common question was, now that the DORA compliance deadline has passed in January, what are the penalties for non-compliance?
So people are going to, you know, people that haven't done it, I didn't look at the penalties today. I know we did a previous one where we spoke about the penalties, and the penalties are one of the biggest penalties across all regulations. But I think they're based on a percentage-wise. I can have a quick, I'm sure one of you knows, I want to put in the chat, but they're big. They're something that I would have a serious look at, because if somebody does come and do an audit, or if you do have an issue, your fine will be right up there. They're one of the biggest ones across all the regulations. So yeah.
Another question asks, how is third-party risk management different under DORA as opposed to traditional third-party risk management, which may be considered to be a subset of risk management, because third-party risk management is specifically called out?
What they're pushing is that you are doing more in terms of resiliency testing in third-party risk management. So remember that a lot of third-party risk management seems to be focused more on security necessarily, or on data protection. What they're saying to you is look at security and data protection, but focus on resiliency as well. How do your third parties actually focus on how strong are they in terms of the resiliency components? And I do think that's a very good difference, a great question, because a lot of times we've done third-party risk management, but we're actually not necessarily pushing the same level of resiliency on them that we need from them.
Thank you. Another question asks, how do the incident notification rules of DORA interconnect with NIST 2?
That's a very good question, that one, in terms of DORA. Remember, I'm doing, I think on 27,034, how it connects it to DORA. I haven't checked That link is, I did a presentation last year for the PCB on this too, and we did talk a lot about it. So I think, remember that a lot of the regulations don't go into the massive detail on things like that. They say to you, you must follow best practice in terms of incident notifications. But the difference with something like with DORA is that it's connected into financial regulatory boards. So when you're doing your incident notification, you're doing it through the financial regulatory boards. When you're doing this too, you're doing it through a different mechanism. So they're just different mechanisms, but they're largely very similar. They're really very similar processes, very similar ones, because most of your companies are going to have one incident response process, and they're just going to have a little link to NIST, to DORA, GDPR. So the difference is not very much. It's just you need to know that this too is a different contact point and a slightly different way of doing it.
Thank you. And a question asks, how does ISO 27034 relate to IEC 62443? Could ISO 27034 be applied to achieve IEC 62443 objectives?
There'll always be a link. You can go and have a look at the levels of trust and the application security controls. You can look at the case studies, and you can use it to apply it across so many different mechanisms. So yeah, it can be used.
Another question related to ISO 27034 says that you mentioned the fact that we should do it properly once reuse. Isn't this statement a threat to continual improvement?
Great question. I love that. So that's why I use that word about how I was idealistic, and we must be careful right at the beginning on that. But when you are doing something properly once, you're going to reuse it, but you're going to have learned from every implementation of it. So I develop something strongly. I do a heavy level of testing. I make sure that it's strong. It's got effective security controls. All the ACs are there, but then I bring it and I do it in my next implementation, and I see that this place is a little bit different. There's one or two nuances here that are different. I must then apply those changes. So what that means is you don't leave it alone forever. You apply the changes to but you've done 80–90% of the work, and you don't have to redo every start from the beginning. So we're not saying use it and then leave it forever. We're saying you do it like that and then tweak it, add on to it, but you're only adding an incremental differences. That's a very good question. I'm glad you could allow me to explain that.
Another question regarding DORA. There was a lot of questions regarding DORA. So it says DORA is focusing on the financial sector. What is done with respect to other sectors being critical for our society?
A lot of the other sectors are covered by some other regulations, but not all are. So, I think what you'll find is it's quite difficult to cover, to come up with a regulation that's applicable to every single industry. So what they've done is they've rather singled out the most critical ones and then said, okay, but we still know that things are really important. When we look at things like the manufacturing industries, which have suffered a lot of issues, never mind some of the public sector industries, some of them have their own regulations. The ones that don't should be looking at generic ones. We did get that really good question about ISO. So you can apply 27001 and then maybe go and have a look at what's in DORA and look at how you can improve your resiliency. Don't always wait for regulation is one of my biggest advice to people. You can look at DORA and go, some of that's really cool. Let me go and apply that for myself.
Perfect. And one last question. ISO 27034 refers to processes involved with the application. How to differentiate these processes from application-based controls required in DORA or ISC as referred in the ISO? Example, backup management.
So you shouldn't apply them differently. You should be looking at the application security controls and see how you can bring them into DORA and vice versa. So the difference in terminology can be confusing sometimes, but the fact is application security controls or application security controls. The thing with 27034, they often get very granular. So they will, you know, when we're looking at DORA and ISO, they will have a much high level control. It'll be talk about do secure security testing. Now, when you're doing secure security testing, you should go into 27034 and use those subset of IECs specifically. So it's more specific in 27034 and more at a high level generic in DORA in 27001 most of the time.
Thank you, Bevan, once again for this highly informative webinar. Thank you, the audience, and all of the questions that they have asked. Unfortunately, we will not be able to cover them all, but all of them will be posted on our next issue of the PCB magazine. So make sure to subscribe. And this webinar is being recorded and will be posted on our website and YouTube channel along with the slides of the presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.